You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 201 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden Dale here with Pankaj, Bhojwani. As always, this week on the pod, we are talking a world without the purple man, a post-Viserai world. It's happening. It's coming very soon. We can flick our attention to the Living Legend points when we get to the main topic of the pod and speculate as to when it will happen this week or next week. But by the time we get out of the other side of Road to Nationals, there will definitely be no Viserai unless something absolutely crazy happens in terms of meta shift this next weekend, which I can't see happening. So, yeah, with all that said, this week in Flesh and Blood, Pankaj, what's been happening?
I had a bit of a rough showing in my RTN this past weekend. Had a rough start into an Enigma. I was playing new. They had a very strong start with a Mirror Guy and Astral Etchings, after which they also dissolved reality in my arsenal, so I need to fight that back with like 4 cards. Had a rough start there, but did come back from it. Had a very hard fought comeback into that, but unfortunately we went to time. I don't think either of us slow played. It just ended up being a bit of a long game. And so we went to time after me coming back from that, which kind of got me a little bit tilted because I felt like, I came back from that thing and then was very poised to win, got a little bit tilted. And definitely, don't tilt people, because I think that tilt kind of got me my next loss. Like my next game ended up being like a loss because I just had a small lapse of judgment at a certain point where I was supposed to use my tunic and then I didn't. Then when I needed my tunic to be up, it wasn't up because I used the tunic a turn late, basically. Ended up losing that game and kind of was knocked out the RTN at that point. So that was my RTN weekend. Not the best. Hoping to do a little bit better this weekend. How's your weekend, Flesh and Blood, Hayden?
Yeah, just on that, before I get into it, if you want to hear me and Pankaj break down a little bit more around maybe some of the conversation around time, going to time, like you said, not slow play in this instance, but we are going to talk about slow play, all those things. The monthly Patreon pod actually covers that topic. We really get into it this month, so if you're interested in hearing that, make sure you do check out our monthly additional content pod over on Patreon. I played an RTN this weekend as well. It went okay. I went 5-1 into top 8. I actually massively punted my loss in Swiss. It was pretty funny. I played the Mirror. I was playing Viserai. I played the Mirror, and I kind of like high rolled to no end in the first couple of turns. Like had a massive Mordred Tide turn. My opponent misses Sonata, and then like just the classic Viserai things. And then I just get super greedy and make a play that I knew it's so weird. I feel like at the time I knew the play was terrible, but I was like, this would be so cool, and he'll just die this turn. I should just do it. And then it bricked on a Sonata that I didn't need to basically play and rely on. I was relying on the Sonata's finite attack, which I just didn't need to do. And then I effectively just like brick the next 2 turns in a row with all non-attack action hands into like an all red hand sort of thing, and just lose the game where I feel like I was so far ahead. It was ridiculous. And it was pretty funny because it didn't change my top 8. Like I top 8'd and things, but it was just like, why did I do that? Like, why did I feel the need to do that? I feel like it's something I never usually do, is like just take a punt for no reason. Just going back to my Rhinar playing days there. So made top 8, lost a very, very close game in top 8 to Zen, which, honestly, it was insane. Like, it gets so close down to the last turn, if I draw a 3 block in my hand, so I have like 3 2 blocks and a Sigil of Suffering, my opponent's on 1. If I draw a 3 block, then they have to sequence in a way where they have to have no resources down. Like, they have to effectively go... they have to swing the weapon, which is the main thing that's going to mean they don't have the resources to Arcane Barrier, and then I can kill them with the Sigil. But yeah, it was, and even the turn before, I had a Sigil as well, because I hadn't seen any Sigils, and I draw another one in that hand before that, and my opponent just sequences perfectly to play around the Sigil. It was so good. So it was a really interesting game. But yeah, I had fun on the weekend. I love playing RTNs. I'm looking forward to playing one this weekend, because I haven't been able to get to many PQs and RTNs recently. So.
Brother, last week you said you were thinking of bringing Dash. What happened to that? Your girl is at the brink of LLing. Are you going to push her over the threshold there?
Well, you know who is definitely going to LL. That's Mr. Viserai. And you told me, I took your advice. You said if you're going to play Viserai, you should do it this weekend, because what if he LLs? And you know what? Fair point, right? And I probably have one more weekend this weekend, maybe 2 weekends, depending on who you ask, or what you think. So maybe I could run back Viserai this weekend. Honestly, what I realized, and we can talk about this in maybe the history of Viserai when we get into talking about a post-Viserai world, I don't enjoy playing this iteration of Viserai.
I did say that. You did get me there. I did recommend you play Viserai, but yeah. I think it's very likely that this is his last weekend, but there is not super small chance that he survives. He's just like 4 points off, like the way Briar was forever. But I think by end of RTN season, he's gone. Like, he needs 19 wins, right? He's definitely getting that over 2 weekends, but how probabilities works. He might just get like 18 this weekend and he's alive for one more week.
Well, especially since like everyone, like so many people are doing the same thing I did, showing up for his last hurrah, bringing Viserai, and so other people are showing up, bringing the anti-Viserai, like, trying to like hate on him, right? So it's like, which one wins out? Just sheer numbers of people playing him, or people who are prepared for Viserai winning their events? So we'll see.
You say anti-Viserai, and as I was writing up the show notes and talking about Viserai being at the top of this week's Classic Constructed wins, I was like, he barely has any bad enemies. What is the anti-Viserai? It's just Zen, but even that, as you were saying, like even in your top 8 game, it's so incredibly close. There's enough times Viserai just wins that. It doesn't even feel as anti-Viserai as, say, like how Jarl is anti-Syndra. Yeah, I'm not even sure if Viserai has that, which I think is part of what makes him so strong.
Oh, I do think Dash is really good into Viserai. That is the reason I was talking about playing it. The other one I think is good is that if you're playing like full CYB Enigma with like Red Essence and all these like hate cards, I think that matchup is close to unlosable. Like, I think either your CYBs have to be so buried in your deck, or they have to be playing like all the Blessing of Occults and like Rune Blood Incantations and stuff to be able to stack enough Rune Chance to kill you.
Okay. I guess Verdance is pretty good into Viserai as well, but we'll get more into that. Shall we get on to the... Sorry?
Yeah, let's go to the news.
Yeah, because Scout. Should we move on to the news? Okay, so news, we have a new deck tech on the channel from Hayden over here. It's Arachne Slipped Through the Cracks. Would recommend go watch it if you haven't already. You brought on Jason Long, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, Mr. Jason Long, who is...
Yes.
One of New Zealand's premier players, 5-time calling top 8 competitor, Mr. Jason Long, which people probably like, who the heck is Jason Long? If you haven't heard him before, but one of the OGs. One of the coolest things that him and his friends do is that every time there is a calling in Australia or New Zealand, a Classic Constructed one, especially around a new set, they've done this before, they will brew up like a deck. They want to always be different. They try and do something that's very off the beaten path or something different that people haven't been doing, and they will come with something. They will cook, and they'll come with something cool. Last time it was this ridiculous Evo control dash deck that they played, and this time it was this, and they put all 3 of them into the cache, one in top 8, so top 4 even.
It's a really, really cool list. Definitely go check that out. Next, we spoke about a new monthly series that we're starting on the channel last week. When we spoke about it last week, we said it'll come out early this week. We unfortunately encountered some delays on the editing side of it, but it should be out by the end of this week. So look out for it this coming weekend. Other than that, Hayden, we had a couple of things announced today at the time of this recording. The first one, Max Armory deck. Max the Hype Nitro is getting his Armory deck, and we've seen 2 new cards already, 2 new previews, which perhaps hint at a shift in the direction they're taking this hero. The first one is Bank Breaker. It's a mechanologist weapon wrench. And remember, for everyone, a wrench is not a gun. This says twice per turn action for 1 resource. You may attack with this. It has 3 power. And activate this only if you have cranked this turn. When this attacks, you may banish a card from under it. If you do, the attack gets overpower and go again. Super interesting because we, as of yet, don't know of any cards that can put a card under this. So obviously there's other stuff in his Armory deck that lets you do that. The other card we have seen is Clamp Press. It's a 2-card blue mechanologist item that has Crank, and it says this enters the arena with 2 steam counters. At the start of your turn, destroy this unless you remove a steam counter from it. Wrenches you control get +2. So it's kind of like Teclo Pounder that hangs around and just gives you a wrench +2 for the turn. So it seems like they're shifting Max's identity to wrench and like wrench payoffs in a sense, away from the Mechanoid stuff, Hayden.
Yeah, so your clan press, I guess, on the surface of it is a 2-card 8, right? You get to attack, if you can, well, it depends. If you can find a way to get it into play with the steam counters, right? So it comes with 2 steam counters, you crank it, you'll come in for 2 bank breakers if you set it up. So, and then the following turn do the same thing. But can you find a way to get steam counters on it? Can you find a way to, put this into play and attack on the same turn without using a steam counter? There's all sorts of different things I have questions about what we'll see in the max deck that might support this. But I think it's really cool. I like both of these cards. They're flavorful. They're interesting. Yeah.
We'll definitely have to see more. I don't want to theorize too much on this until we have, honestly, the rest of the cards. We could probably just go on and keep theorizing. But yeah, we'll just need to wait on more spoilers to come. The other thing that was announced, Hayden, Pro Tour APAC, the second Pro Tour of 2025, was announced. It's going to be in Singapore.
Yeah.
And I'm so incredibly excited to just go back home. I mean, for me, it's just going back home and just having a Pro Tour in my home country, I guess, and just show everyone, honestly, just hang out with all my flesh and blood friends in Singapore.
Yeah. Is there any temptation for you to want to play this one rather than work it, in terms of just from because it's in your hometown? It's like, could I win Pro Tour Singapore?
There actually was a little bit. There definitely was. Yeah, I don't know, but maybe I'll see. Unlikely though. Yeah.
No, I'm excited. Very excited for Singapore. I spoke about this in pre-show, but at more length. But I love the place. I am super excited to go back there. Food, things to do, things to see, bit of shopping, of course, and Pro Tour.
The food is definitely the main thing. I keep telling people, they're like, "Oh, what should we do in Singapore?" I'm like, "You eat." And they're like, "Oh, what should we see? What touristy stuff to see?" I'm like, that really doesn't matter. The touristy stuff in Singapore is stuff you do until you are hungry again. It's the stuff you do in between eating. It's stuff you do in between eating until you can eat again, because that's really the only thing that matters.
Fair.
Alongside the Pro Tour Singapore announcement, they showcased Adult Valda, which has the same text box as the young version, except they did kind of chicken out Hayden, and they only gave her 40 health instead of 42. Because normally, you would double the young hero's health, and she's 21, the young version, but the adult only has 40. So, I don't know, maybe she's broken, and they were like, we can't give her 42.
Yeah, I think they just don't want to... They want to give you a reason to maybe play Betsy over this. Maybe.
Of course, yes, has to be that.
I don't know.
Other than that, we have week 2 of RTN results to talk about. So... the week 2 results are in. We have Viserai at the top with 24 wins. Syndra at 21. So kind of just under Viserai there, the new premier aggro deck in a sense. Below Syndra is new at 18 wins, and then Aurora at 16 wins. And these 4 are sort of the top 4, and everyone else is now in the sub 10 win range. Do you have any thoughts on our top 4 here? Or honestly, the RTN's week 2 results?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty aggressive meta, right? That's what we're definitely seeing. I mean, Nu is trying to take advantage of that, obviously up in there, but Viserai, Syndra, Aurora making up, half of the wins this week is pretty, or near on half the wins this week is pretty significant. I think it's interesting to see, another deck try and do that, take advantage of the aggressive meta in the form of Prism. Just, slapping Heralds, and I think it's such a bad matchup for Syndra, so it makes a lot of sense. Arachne Marionette, I know you've been toying around with that hero. I've been playing a little bit with it actually this week. I'm interested to see... I really don't know if we've seen even close to refined deck lists for Arachne at this stage. And I think that hero can feel somewhat underpowered, I think. And its mechanic is so interesting. But yeah, 9 wins is probably more than I would have guessed, honestly, for that hero. And especially... more than, say, Enigma at 7. The other one that stands out to me, actually, is Vincent and Dash. 5 for Dash IO, 4 for Vincent. Just thought that was quite interesting. Even, Ira, Florian, etc. aren't doing that kind of numbers, so...
What you said about Arachne Marionette is... Yeah, it's super interesting, because Actually, there's so many turns where the Arachne does their thing, and you're like, that was a very unfair turn. Like, how did you just deal 20 to me while threatening disruption and stuff? But then there are those other turns, as you pointed out, where they're just doing an incredibly underpowered thing, where they go like Hunter's Clave and attack you with like a 4-power thing, and you block the 4-power thing, and they go, okay, pass with 2 cards, because they just needed to go again there, and they just like whiffed on reacts. So it goes back to what you're saying, right? Like maybe we haven't seen the full refined version of this deck. Maybe there's a way to balance out the clunkiness with the power. But I do think the hero, I think the hero has some really, really strong stuff. And I'm looking to actually take Marinette this weekend to my RTN instead of Nu. And, we'll see how that goes. I'll report back next week.
I get on board. If you're going to listen to me, I can get on board. I could maybe join the Pankaj bandwagon this week. We could, play it together.
Yeah, I'm totally down. The other deck I want to point out is Aurora, who to me feels like that aggro deck just has answers for everything. In that, how people are talking about, okay, Syndra's coming up, and they're like, okay, you play Jarl into Syndra, and then you just dunk on them. Because they can't deal with ice. But if you try and play a defensive sort of strategy into Aurora, she just combos you and like kills you anyway. So to me, Aurora feels like a little bit slept on. People are talking about Viserai, people are talking about Syndras, people are talking about the Assassins, they're talking about Prism. But Aurora is something there isn't a lot of community discourse around, but I think her results speak for herself over here. I fully... Like, her being at the top here is not surprising to me. I've been saying for a while in the pod, I think she's a very, very strong hero. I'm
really interested to see, as we head towards London, the Aurora Armory deck is the only product release we have now between now and London. I've been messing around a little bit with what that could look like, what that Armory deck might have an impact of. The cards aren't available, right? And, Teleshar, rightly so, isn't supporting that card, so I can't sort of mess around with it on Teleshar, but I did proxy it up to play a couple of games, and I think Aurora is going to be a very real contender for London with these upgrades. I think, I've probably not been at the same level as you, Pankaj, around Aurora's strength. I've been a little bit lower. But with this Armory deck, I'm definitely ready to come up a little bit. I think it could be in and near that sort of tier 1 to tier 1.5 territory as we go to London.
I think, I think she's tier 1 already, and I'm with you. I think she'll remain at that spot. She's just so resilient as well, right? When I play Nu into Aurora, it's just a little bit frustrating sometimes. You're like, oh, you have all these no blocks, I should be able to disrupt you, and they just like dodge all your disruption, because the good Auroras will just put an instant in their arsenal every time. And the number of times I've seen Aurora and they just go CLV in response, okay, cool, take 6. And I was like, I hate this. I hate everything that's happening over here. And then she also forces you to have a piece of ABE so you don't get blown up by Sigil of Suffering. It's just, she asks you so many questions and they're very, very difficult to deal with. I'm a big fan of this hero. Her main problem is that in the aggro race, in a pure aggro race, she is typically the slower one because she has a little more clunk. Like, Syndra has mass momentum on the table from the beginning. Aurora needs to find the CLV. It's kind of the equivalent, right? Like, that's kind of how she loses out a little bit in the aggro race, but I think she makes up for it by being extremely resilient into disruptive decks and has this combo sideboard with the Flicker Wisp and Arc Lightning stuff.
One thing I will say about Aurora, as I've been diving into Aurora a little bit more, is I actually don't think the lists we've seen out there, I won't say they're not good. They are. I think they were particular for a meta, and I think as we move forward, especially in aggressive meta, these Aurora decks have not adapted to what I probably would have expected them to. I've been messing around with some cards, and I think you can play cards that cost. That's where my head's at right now. So I'm doing some investigation on that. That's what I'll say.
That's really cool. I think you alluded to this when we were talking about the Marinette thing. I think the card pool has just gotten big enough for Flesh and Blood at this point where you are actually seeing markedly different builds within the same hero and within the same class. And I think that's a really, really exciting time to be in.
Yeah, the mark different builds, that's Marinette, I think. That one. Yeah.
For sure.
Terrible jokes. Okay, let's move on. Command & Cookout time. If you want to get your questions in for the Command & Cookout, you can do so. Email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below. If you're a video watcher, you can also put them in the Arsenal Pass Discord if you are an Arsenal Pass patron. Or you can drop us a note, send us a DM on Twitter, things like that. See us at an event, give us a question. This question comes again from another question of our recent mailbag episode where we had some questions remaining that we didn't get to. This is from XXMew2096, who asks, do you expect any new adult versions of heroes such as Blaze, Dory, what is Dory's Quicksilver? No?
Quicksilver Prodigy.
I was thinking, what's the P? Quicksilver Prodigy. Data Doll to come this year. Not all of them would be top tier CC heroes, brackets KO, but some of them could be very fun to play outside of Blitz. Well, what about a Velda? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I probably wouldn't have been on my bingo card to have more than one of these get a treatment, but we have seen it, right? I guess if there was to be another one, I don't think we'll see another one this year, honestly. I think this is the one. Are they going to do this sporadically, periodically to help people? I think what it does is it helps you bridge the gap between Blitz and CC if people enter on Blitz as well. Like, hey, there's a hero I can identify with because there are so many Blitz only heroes. Like, isn't there like 40 something heroes in Blitz or something? I don't know. It's insane. So, and a lot of them aren't in CC. So how do you bridge that gap? I think if we were to see another one, which I don't think we would, I'm not sure it would be any that Mewtwo sort of has here. I don't think we're seeing an adult Blaze. Yeah.
I really want to see an adult Blaze so bad. Although, obviously, I want a playable wizard that feels like a wizard. But, yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure whether Blaze would be my kind of wizard, even if they make an adult version of her. But to a point, I think the adult Ira coming out did a lot for the transition, as you're talking about, for people to move from 100%. Blitz to CC. Tons of people, as you say, start with the Ira starter decks, or were just playing Ira and Blitz, and then she comes out in CC, and they're like, oh, okay, cool. It's a very easy move to playing that format. And yeah, adult Velda coming out. I'm with you. I think at most, if they do, it'll probably just be one other than the Velda already announced. But yeah, I don't see it being too many.
Yeah. I am interested to see, though, the impact, because we go set to set, right? And you have the impact of what the flavor and the kind of mechanics of a set are in terms of what comes into it from a hero standpoint, and often some of the cards that are introduced for existing heroes, but that's usually a little bit more minimal. The expansion slot is kind of what drives that to an extent. But then they have this other avenue, which is obviously the armory decks, but then this just gives another take where it's like, well, maybe there's a hero that resonates or is a right fit for the format right now, but we don't have space to bring it in through a set, but it exists as a Blitz hero or a young hero that we can convert to an adult hero as a promo, as a piece, around it. Like, this is Pro Tour Worlds as Ira was. That fits really nicely. And it's just another cool way, very creative way that they can introduce something into the game that might be needed or might feel really appropriate for that time.
And it also gives them an avenue to just inject a little bit of that mechanic into CC. And what I'm talking about, what I'm referring to here is Jarl, where they don't need to create a whole new set for Ice to come back. They just released Ice in an armory deck, and then now we have Ice in a format again, but a small dosage of it. Whereas if it was a full set worth of Ice, you could totally expect Ice to dominate the meta or be a significant part of it. Whereas this is just a little, it's like a little microdose. Like, hey, there's Ice if you want it, but it's not going to be at the forefront of the meta until it actually becomes part of a set. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, no, I'm down for it. Well, if you want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, please do so. With that said, where are we going now?
So we're going to move on into the main topic, Hayden, which is what does the CC meta look like post Viserai's LL? Because it is absolutely upon us. And we have this discussion a lot. Pretty much every single time anyone LLs, we talk about how the LL system often leads to larger shakeups in the meta compared to new set releases. Right? You think about Dromai LLing and Iysander LLing and Oldhim LLing and the wave of CC meta reform that happens after that is comparable or even more than new set releasing. And I think this one's going to be no different. So we're going to spend the rest of this pod talking about that. Because Viserai has been one of the best decks of the format since Rosetta released, since Rosetta gave him all those solid upgrades, mainly Malefic Incantations and Rune Rager Swarms, which funnily enough are kind of the commons of the set. Just goes to show he already had the Majestics he needed, really. Succumb was a fine enough upgrade, but Malefics and Rune Rager Swarms was where he actually got his power level increase. So yeah, after about 5 years since his release, he had his ups and downs, and he's finally about to sunset out of CC. Hayden, would you like to walk us through the history of this hero?
Yeah, Viserai is a hero that's been pretty near and dear to my heart. I was playing the game when it was first released back in Arcane Rising. It was, not much of a hero to speak about during Arcane Rising, honestly. It didn't have a big impact on what was, a smaller game at the time in the format. It just was quite awkward. Nebula Blade was strong, but the cost structure of kind of the cards around it didn't really support it. It wasn't really until we got to Crucible that we started to see some impact. Obviously, Bloodsheath Skelata coming out, that was a big part of that. Runeblood Barrier was in that set. There was a lot of, there's some really strong cards in Crucible. It's the first time we saw Reaping Blade as well. That's where Reaping Blade was printed. But still, Nebula Blade kind of prevailed, and Mothering Skies was actually the massive impact of that set. So I think it started to have a bit of an impact. But Dash was quite good in that format, has typically been good into Viserai just historically. And then, of course, we get to our Shadow Rune Blade with Chain releasing, and then Briar and subsequent sets. And honestly, Viserai kind of took a bit of a back seat until we did get Sonata Arcanix to use along with Bloodsheath Skelata from Monarch. But it didn't really come to the forefront, right, until Briar's time. Yeah, exactly. Trying to think of the cards in Everfest that we got for that, right? So you get the
Swarming Gloomveil, Revel in Runeblood, and Vexing Quillhand. Those were massive upgrades for that hero.
Yeah, so obviously the Bloodsheath Skelata combo that we saw, right? Just doing OTK kills, as I was a big fan of, winning nationals with that strategy. But also it was just like a kind of hybrid strategy that you could use as well. It became so powerful because you could be an aggro deck, you could be a combo deck, and you could even, you could do anything in between. It was very, very strong. And then eventually Skelata gets banned just before PT1. I remember testing for PT1 and knowing that was coming. It was like, Skelata's going to get banned. Let's just test as if it's not going to be there, which we did. So yeah. That's kind of the history of Viserai. And then it kind of, I guess, with Rosetta coming out, that's when it really came back, right, to your point, Swarming Rune Rager Swarm. My words.
Rune Rager Swarm and Malefic Incantation.
And Malefic Incantation really moved the needle again on Viserai and brought it back to the forefront. Obviously, in the lead up to Worlds last year, played a pretty big role. And then it's probably, honestly, since Dash.io got the nerf, just been the best deck in the format, or at least competing for best deck in the format. So, since Worlds.
It's so interesting that it's really the commons from Zeta that pushed this hero back to the forefront. He did get really good Majestics and Legendaries as well. He got Phase Purgatory, which is a very, very good card. He got Snuff Outs and Succumb to Temptation, but all of those still pale in comparison to the Malefics and the Rune Rager Swarms that he got there. Running 6 of Malefic Incantations, even dipping into the yellows. And similar with Rune Rager Swarms, definitely on the reds and blues, and some are also on the yellows. Just goes to show where he needed that. He just needed more. He needed a better consistency piece than the Mothering Skies attack into weapon thing.
Well, it's just not good value, right? It's just like if I have Mothering Skies to just give go again, I don't get the rune chance off of it. Like the value on that card is terrible. It's interesting, Face Purgatory. I actually just don't think that card is that good in Viserai, honestly. I think that card is kind of whatever. Maybe it's just the meta at the moment, but I don't like it.
I completely agree, because the turns where you want to block more are the turns where you brick, which is where you drew all 4 attacks, all 4 non-attacks, and that card doesn't help you there. And the turns where you don't want to block, or where you drew your perfect ratio, or you drew that moderate tide with a whole bunch of Gloomveils and Rune Rager Swarms, and you have incantations around, then that's your only non-attack, and you can't give that up. That's the way I felt playing Purgatory and Viserai. Like, my strong hands are the ones which turn on Purgatory, but I don't want to block with them because they're my strong hands. And my weak hands are where I want to stop them a little bit, but I can't because my Purgatory is offline because this hand's weak. I'm completely with you.
And then you look at these hands, you're like, one card different, this hand will be broken, and I don't have Crown to try and cash it and see what I can do, like Crown of Providence. So, I didn't register Face Purgatory in the list that I played in the weekend. Tell you what, actually, I'm gonna just throw up my Viserai list that I played in the weekend. I'll throw the link below, but also if you're an Arsenal Pass patron, I'll throw up the whole kind of sideboard guide and everything for Viserai. It won't take me too long to write it up. Because I think the list that I played, obviously, is only probably last week, so if you want to run this list, I'll get it up today so that you can play it. But I think the list I played was good. I think it's quite good into this current meta. I don't like Face Purgatory. I like other suite of equipment more. So yeah, I'll throw it up.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, the other thing about Purgatory is that he's also moving, or at least has moved, towards a more defensive playstyle, right? I think popularized by Noah Bigelman at Worlds last year.
Yeah.
So running D-reacts and haunting renditions and stuff, then it just more things that just don't really work with the Purgatory. Or you're more likely to draw just the one attack in your hand. Like either just the one attack or one non-attack, and it's very risky to just give that up to block with a Purgatory. So
yeah, it's interesting. I think Viserai is the most explosive deck, and Aurora might have a claim with kind of Flicker Wisp, lightning turns, but I think Viserai is the most explosive deck in the format right now. It has the most explosive potential on these Mordred Tide turns that do 30 plus damage. I did a 39 damage turn with no rune chance starting the turn on the weekend. You can just do some absolutely broken stuff. So I actually don't like playing defensive cards in my deck. I think it's bad. I don't play defensive because I think the best power of that deck is the fact that it just does ridiculous stuff. And you play enough 3-block density that like your bad hands, I think you can sort it out. But I think what you do by putting those cards into your point is you reduce the consistency of like this kind of semi-broken aggro combo deck. So yeah, not a fan.
with that, Hayden, I think let's move on and talk about his impact on the current meta. Or in other words, what makes him so strong right now. And
which we kind of have, right? But to a degree, we've started like a little bit of that. I guess I segued, too early on that.
Yeah. Well, I guess in a little more, general sense, and talk about the decks he's keeping down, which leads us into what happens when he leaves, right? So I think, to your point, what we are seeing with Viserai is extreme variability in his turns. And I think that's where his strength is. Where there are some turns where he's just like, cool, I'm going to spend 4 cards setting up. I'm going to play a Malefic, a Dirge, and a Read the Runes, and then answer my last card and pass to you. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be a deck that can convert your 4 or 5 card hands back at them efficiently. Otherwise, they just got a bunch of free value. At the same time, the turns where he's popping off, he's sending 12 Rune Chants, he's sending all the split damage at you. 12 Rune Chants, 9th Blades, and like Go Against and a Reaping Blade at the end and all that kind of stuff. So at the same time, you need some way to defend against those turns as well. So you're asking a very, very tough question on most of your opponents, being like, can you block well and can you attack well if I give you the space? Which just most decks just simply cannot do at the same level of flexibility that he can.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's like, and you get to flex, and then you also get to punish your opponent for deck building. So often, like, once you show up with your deck, you're like, okay, how did I do in deck building, basically, to the earlier point? Like, did I do well in my deck building? I've showed up with a good deck. I haven't, right? And then also your opponent plays that game, right? Like, how did they show up in the event with how they did in deck building? But you actually get to like flex to how they built the deck and how they decided to sideboard for the matchup. Like the first time I see a defense reaction in a matchup against maybe against Zen, or I'm playing the Mirror or something and they have a defense reaction, I'm like, oh, I'm perfectly comfortable now to like take turns off, to your point, right? Flex into that style, and even at the expense of 1 or 2 upfront damage for the potential of a more explosive 1 or 2 damage in the future, even if I don't guarantee it's going to pay off. I'm like, well, they're probably gonna have a defense reaction that's gonna get stuck in their hand. They're gonna IP themselves, and I'm gonna play with that in mind. So yeah, I massively agree that is probably the biggest strength of Viserai, is those variability, like you say.
I hate bringing defense reactions into Viserai. Like, also because a lot of his attacks just come in for 3. Like, he's sending Rune Rager Swarms or like Amplify the Arknights, where they're multiples of 3, where the 4 breakpoint doesn't even help that much. Yeah. So then it just ends up clunking in your hand as well. Yeah. In my new build, my new sideboard into Viserai, I only bring in like 2 Sync Pillows because I don't want to bring Siren's Call, basically. And it's like sometimes Sync can fix my hand, and that's why it's there. But other than that, I just want to try and full damage into Viserai. The other thing that's worth noting about his impact on the current meta is Reaping Blade, which is, so we speak about how he's already turning off certain strategies. He's turning off the sort of mid-rangey block you out sort of strategy because he'll just set up and punish you for it. The other thing he's just passively turning off is life gain. You can't just, it's not super easy to just CYB fatigue a Viserai because they just have this Reaping Blade, and they're just going to set up on you and not deal you any damage, and your CYBs are completely dead cards. Which is why you see heroes like Jarl looking into cards, like they're just digging, they're just like Fissure, scraping the bottom of the barrel, right? They're looking at Roiling Fissure and Smack of Reality. Yeah. And then this goes back to an earlier point. You're forcing this defensively slanted deck to try and be offensive, and that's just so incredibly inefficient for them.
Yeah. It's to to be frank, like I think any non-Enigma CYB deck, like any other CYB deck, just has very bad game into Viserai. Like to your point around Reaper Blade and those sorts of things. The reason I think that Enigma is an exception is because you have pseudo life gain when they're setting up in the form of auras, right? Like you put soon to be life gain on the board, but it's not actual life. You know, you put your ward on the board. Good rhyme. So yeah, I think that's the only reason. But other decks can't do that. And so what are you going to attack them? I mean, they don't care. They don't care about their life total. That just makes it harder for you to cast your CYBs, like because their life total is going. Like if I'm Viserai and I'm playing against a CYB Jarl, like I'm just going to sit up and then what are they going to do? They're going to attack me. I'm going to not block and take the damage, and then I'm going to be able to keep my Reaping Blade. Like it's really good.
The only thing you'll care about is a turned on Smack of Reality, basically, which is hard for them to turn on, right? Tower isn't something that's super easy for them to do. So in that vein, like the best decks into Viserai are the sort of full on aggro decks. Like Syndra is like decent into Viserai, right? Because she can actually punish Viserai setup, and kind of on a average turn cycle has better numbers than Viserai. At the same time, Viserai just has good armor as well because he's a Rune Blade, and he sort of, depending on how the way the cards line up, can keep pace with them, and very importantly, has damage that they just can't deal with, which is arcane damage, right? So if you ever get to the end game state against Viserai and you're on the aggro deck, you kind of lost the game because they have damage you simply cannot deal with because you're not bringing AB into Viserai.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So the one kryptonite is kind of Zen, but as we've already spoken about, it's Zen because of the on-demand Zen state token. But again, it asks the Zen to play in a very specific way, where it's you are either IPing one a chi every turn if the Viserai has a stack of rune chants. Because if they have a stack of rune chants and they send the first thing at you, you can't go on demand get your chi. So you're either IPing the chi or just praying for double transcend when they pop their rune chants. And that's, again, we talk about this being Viserai's bad matchup, but it's not even that bad, as you experience in your top 8 as well. It's very, very easy to make that matchup close or just come down to the wire.
Yeah, you just play an aggro deck, and if they don't transcend well, like they also have to deal you a good chunk of damage and play like an aggro deck, and then they have to make a decision of like, well, how do I use this chi? Like, if you're not stacking up room chance, how much value will they actually get out of popping my chest? Like, if they're not playing wax on, wax off, and even if they're playing wax on, wax off, like they have to draw it pretty early if you're just aggroing them down because you deal a lot of damage. So it's definitely not a bad matchup. I think it's unfavored, but it's not by much. Yeah.
Yep. So, all that to say, we've gone through his history, and we've gone through his impact on the current meta. So what happens when he leaves, either this weekend or the next?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is, like, what are the worst matchups? What decks that have the worst matchup into Viserai? Like, you go, oh, I can't play X because of Viserai. I think non-CYB Enigma is, like, the one that comes to my mind in terms of probably the most powerful thing that's being held back because of it. We've obviously seen Enigma have such a big impact over the past year or so, and it was the same thing when like Zen was really good with bonds, right? It's just like, well, it's just the damage is just too much. The aggro deck is just too aggro-y. Like I can't, like, at least with Enigma, it can find angles into Syndra, I think, but without the CYB kind of fatigue package, I think I just don't think you can beat Viserai. So I think Enigma is a big one.
Enigma, Jarl, Florian, and the Warriors are the ones which come to mind when you think about the terrible matchups for Viserai, which is, the place to start, right? Who are complete dogs into Viserai, and can they come up? And it's super interesting to look at the difference that these decks have, or the matchups these decks have into each other. So I'm with you. I think Enigma does take a bump, and is good into this other stuff that gets beaten up by Viserai, which is Jarl, Florian, Warriors. But if there's an aggro vacuum at the top once Viserai leaves, you expect it to be filled with Syndra and Aurora. You can expect the representation of those decks to go up. And those are way better into Enigma, but are bad into Jarl.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think Jarl has got to be a contender. The one I have a question about is Nu, right? Nu is potentially the matchup is not unwinnable for Nu, right? But it's not a good matchup.
I think it's 50-50.
Yeah, okay. So I think it's 50-50, yeah. So,
just a caveat for an aggressively slanted Nu.
Sure.
That's the style I play.
Yeah. So somewhere around, a slightly maybe unfavored to even, right?
Yeah.
When it goes, is that good for Nu, or is the potential on-flow effect of Enigma being a player back in the meta game again? and especially now that we're moving away from CYB and things like this, probably I would think, is that does that just kind of offset it for Nu, and Nu probably lands around the same spot?
I think the assassins are very, very difficult to try and place because I think they are the ones that react the most to everything else that's happening around them. Like Pick to Pieces, for example, it's a card that's come in and out of Nu lists for like months, just depending on where like Enigma is, for example. And like CYB Nu or not CYB Nu, for example, is a debate that just keeps happening, and we need to see where everyone else lands before it can be decided. But my current take is that it's going to end up being a wash. Because like you said, I think the Viserai matchup is like somewhat even, and Enigma can come in, but then we can cut some of the Viserai tech to add the Enigma tech, which when Nu is teched for Enigma is not even that bad a matchup actually. So if you give us the slots, if you give the Nus the slots back like tech for Enigma, it's like it'll be fine. And if Jarls and Florians want to come, well, Nu's fine into those as well. Where Nus might have a problem, or the assassins in general, is if the warriors come in. If the warriors like, hey, Viserai is gone, we can play now. Those will pose a bit of a problem for the assassins, but then they have the Enigma problem, and I'm not entirely sure how they are into Jarl or Florian.
Which warrior do you think is the standout in terms of potential? Because I think all the warriors, to your point, have been hit by just strength of Viserai plus other things. But the other piece as well, let's assume that Enigma kind of gets better as well. We're still going to see a pretty aggro slanted meta. Which of the warriors stands out to you as the one that maybe becomes a contender?
I think it's Fang, actually. Fang is I think it's Fang, because I think Fang is the one that has the highest chance out of all the warriors to beat Enigma. Actually, I think the Fang Enigma matchup can be built to being even too positive for Fang, because I mean he is Draconic after all, and like Blaze Headlong against Enigma is just like a very, very strong card. And he has just decent damage. Also, he's way harder to block than some of the other warriors. Just the way the numbers on the daggers work is it's a lot harder for Enigma to like block him out and keep the ward. So I'm leaning towards Fang the most. I could see not random, but I could see Dawnblade Dory potentially being a dark horse as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just think
that deck deals damage now.
Yeah,
that deck deals a lot of damage now. But yeah, you said you think it's Fang as well?
I think so. I just the same point. Yeah, I think it's got the most game into Enigma, I think, and I think that's probably most important. I guess the question is though, like if Fang isn't genuine or generally strong enough, then is Warrior just kind of still by the wayside? Like to me, it just feels like Warrior is just struggling in terms of strength in this game, and I do think Fang was probably not how I expected them to address that. Fang might have a different angle for sure, and maybe it's a good enough angle that it is playable in the meta, but it's not like they're out here printing, a game-breaking warrior or, like a clear tier 1 warrior, it seems like. So
I'm just going to clarify. I think if you ask me which warrior is the most likely to potentially have an impact, my answer is Fang. But if you ask me, is it likely that Fang's going to have an impact, my answer is no, for exactly the reason that you just said. I think the warriors are just underpowered. They have this problem where they are kind of structurally aggro decks in that all they do is numbers. There is like we're talking about dual wielding warriors here, I guess. I guess in a sense, Dawnblade Dory does have on hits but it's also an on hits of form of like more damage later on.
Yeah.
There's nothing the warriors do that like make you like care. Like they're never going to take cards from you, kind of thing. So they're built that way, but they just don't have the numbers of the aggro decks or the disruption of the disruptive decks. So they're kind of just in this like just spot where they're not asking any questions and not answering anything either. Like their best spot is just if other people are also trying to play numbers and their numbers are better than theirs, like a KO. Yeah, they beat KO. But okay, that's just not good enough when the Synderas have on 5 intellect, and the assassins are telling this, are like disrupting people and stuff. So it's just, I don't know. Yeah, I don't expect warriors to come up, but who knows? Maybe if the assassins and maybe if the Marios are like, wait, we beat up Enigma every time, then the warriors can come in and save the day, potentially.
Yeah. What about the Guardians?
So
we talked about Yao briefly, but do we think all Guardians get a bit like Victor? Well, I say all Guardians. Victor and Yao.
I do think they get a bump. I do think, and I think Victor has a more reasonable Enigma matchup than Jarl, in the sense that he's obviously still unfavored, but not as unfavored as Jarl is.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think he
can
also
build
has a
to
positive
go
win
a bit
rate
wider and push damage.
Yeah, and I mean, he has cast homes, right? And cast homes is very, very good. You cast homes a CNC or something, like, you send a CNC for 12 into Enigma or something. There are draw sequences where Victor can overcome the Enigma. There are way fewer of those for the Jarl, basically.
Yeah.
So the question is, does Jarl have a positive matchup somewhere else where Victor doesn't? And I think the main reason to bring Jarl would be to target Syndra, but I think Victor is good enough to Syndra already. So I could see Victor being the Guardian that is better poised after Viserai leaves.
That makes sense, actually. What happens to the other Runeblades? So you're losing Viserai, but Aurora's still there. We've got Florian. Does this give space? Because my thought was the Earth Heroes definitely get a bump. Verdance and Florian, honestly. But you said maybe you think Verdance is an okay matchup. Florian, I think, is interesting to me. Is this just now space to finally play Florian? Because it sometimes just felt like worse Viserai.
Once again, it comes down to Enigma, right? Like that's the thing. You don't want to play Florian because Enigma. Although there are builds of Florian that are fine into Enigma, I think, like the Bramble Spark, Channel Millennium Tree stuff. That's actually that can put out damage in that spot. But if you build it to that way, are you losing out against like Syndras and stuff, right? So I could see builds of Florian having success, and Aurora, I think, is gonna stay very similar and gonna have, I think, a very similar matchup spread. I think Aurora's to stay in a very good spot. The one hero which I think isn't being talked about enough, and I think might actually be a big winner from Viserai going away, is Ira. Actually,
Interesting.
I think Ira has a not great matchup into Viserai, especially the sort of the Viserai that has defenses in them as well, where they're fine when you CNC for 7 them or erase phase for 7 them. They're like, cool, here's a 4 block and a 3 block or whatever, and they also have armor pivots. I think Ira might be a sneaky solid pick once Viserai leaves, because I think she can definitely be built to be positive into Enigma. And then also I think can be built to have a good, like in that same 80, have a good matchup into Syndra and Aurora. Because the disruptive pieces for 7 into those decks is a little more problematic.
So so you think it looks quite different to the Iras we're seeing now then?
Not too different.
Okay, not too different. Yeah.
Yeah, not too different. I just don't know. I think I've seen various builds. There's some that are still like very much on like the flick flack, shelter and sink sort of plan, and I think that's, you're kind of sacking Enigma when you do it that way. But then there's some that are playing a little more of the go against stuff, like some even like on the flex claws and stuff. Which once you put those cards in, now your matchup with Enigma just gets so much better, right? I mean, Kodachi for 1, Kodachi for 2 is just such a nightmare for Enigma.
Yeah, the one question I have, I guess, for Ira, just going off your points and I guess the builds and what it can look like, I think, yeah, agree, Enigma. It's probably just, is there enough good damage in that deck? Like, is it doing enough, or is it just too fair? Like, I think that's my only question around Ira.
Is it too fair for who? Like, is there enough damage for Enigma? Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question, because she also does need to put a whole bunch of these clunky blues. So I could see them improving the matchup, but it won't be as good as like Syndra's is into Enigma. I don't expect. But I could still see it being either even to slightly positive for Ira, which I think is fine if she has positive matchups in the other places, because I do think she can be built to be positive into Syndra, for example, where you could totally build her to be like, okay, cool, I'm happy to block 2 cards and stop your mask, and then with my 3 cards, I'm sending a disruptive piece at you, and then once I kept you off the first 4 or 5 card hand, now it's a lot easier for me to block your mask, and a lot easier for me just continuing threatening you with better stuff. And then I think of the sort of aggressively leaning decks, she's the one that can potentially have the best answer into like the Victor and the Jarls, whereas I feel like Syndra into Victor is just miserable.
Yeah, it's got the most flex, because it can play almost any card, right? Its game plan is not set to needing necessarily specific combinations of cards like a lot of other decks are. I think one question I have is like Aurora as well. If I think about Aurora, is Aurora got too much damage for Ira, potentially, just playing as pure aggro? And does the disruption matter? Or can even Ira just kind of like play a couple of Arc Lightnings and Flicker Wisps instead of a couple of small combos, because honestly, like if you give... So I don't think the Ira can do it all, and once you feel out what the Ira decks are doing, if you give them 5 cards, like they might not be able to use them, especially if they're trying to play defense reaction and stuff, and that might just kind of crush them. Because I also think that if they're playing this kind of like mid-rangey classic Ira style, and then they have a brick on like not getting a disruption piece in their hand, like that might just lose them the game. Like it feels a little bit like Azalea to me. It's like, oh, this one turn I didn't see it in the ledger or whatever. It's just like, oh yeah, you probably lose because of that.
Yeah, I could totally see that being a reasonable way it shakes out as well. For me personally, I think Ira... Yeah, I think Ira could be a sneaky winner, but I think she also will need to find a way to deal with the assassins too. Where I don't think she has a strictly negative into the assassins. But I think Nu potentially is pretty tough, because you spoke about how she doesn't need a strict combination of cards every turn. Not in a specific sense, but generally she needs 1 blue a turn.
Yeah.
And because of that, I felt like Nu into Ira has just been, I get 3 time walks into them, because I silence call them 3 times a game, and the game goes long enough because they're not that fast.
Yeah.
So I get to time walk them 3 times, and that can be just a bit of a problem for them. So they will need to solve that. So maybe Ira's not it, but I'd keep an eye on her. I'd keep an eye on where Ira goes.
Okay.
Is there any, perhaps unknown, or any hero or class we haven't discussed yet that sticks out to you?
I mean, I think class-wise, I think Wizard. It's definitely good for Wizard. Like, if I think about Verdance, Acilio, Kano, I think it was already reasonable. It's that matchup wasn't terrible for Kano, I don't think. But I do think for Verdance and Acilio, like, my experience, I guess, was that I didn't think it was great for Verdance. So I do think it helps Wizards. Well, I also think the reason I think that as well is because I do wonder if the format slows a little bit. It's quite an aggressive format at the moment, and I think a slightly slower format, a bit more of a mid-range format, is the exact sort of thing Wizards can unpick and work out their spot and do damage. So
Verdance is a very weird one, because I do think she had a positive win rate into Viserai, but then the new players that are coming in, like to your point about the meta slowing down, the new players coming in, like the Florians and the Jarls and the Warriors, if they do, are also positive of Verdance, because they're slow, and Verdance is like, cool, I'll just take advantage of that, as you said, except Enigma. Enigma is one where if she comes back and increases in popularity quite a bit, then that's a very negative win rate for Verdance, so that could cause a problem.
That's true, but you can find, like, I'm sure there's a strategy somewhere, like, for one matchup, as if it's this one matchup, obviously one of the best decks in the format, like, I think there might be a way to at least get it to be, like, 50-50 in an event. I don't know.
Potentially. I mean, Plume for Summer's Fall is not bad. It's kind of like an on-board counter for Traverse, right? Yeah.
But yeah, not so sure. What about you? Anything else that's sort of coming to your mind? Classes you want to talk about? Heroes you want to talk about in this, I guess, this fallout of Viserai leaving?
Yeah, I want to talk about Riptide. Because I think Riptide had a terrible matchup into Viserai, like absolute garbage matchup into Viserai. But once he's gone, I think he's very good into the Assassins. If Warriors want to play, he's good into them. I think his matchup to Enigma is... To be honest, okay, I think this is one of those where it might be a 90-90 until we get more serious testing into it, because I've heard reports from both sides. Enigma saying they've never lost to Riptides, and Riptides saying they always be Enigmas. So, could be a 90-90, but I could see that coming out to being somewhat even-ish, potentially. Where I wouldn't say one is strictly favored, but I could reasonably see how either side deals with what the other side wants to do, which to me makes it feel like it could be an even-ish matchup. And then the question is whether Earth Hero lands, or whether Earth Heroes / the Guardians land, right? Because that will be the problem for Riptide. But yeah, that's another one which I have an eye out on.
Yeah, there's a bit of like things to shake out, right? In terms of what are the key players, which I think we can kind of maybe move to and wrap things up on a little bit. Is just like, what do we actually think the meta is going to look like? What are those players? Because I think we keep referencing Enigma, like both of us do. So clearly, we think Enigma is a winner out of this, and something's going to happen off the back of it. But the big question I really have is like, how aggressive is the format, and what is the best deck in the format once this goes? Like, is it Enigma? Is it Aurora? Is it Syndra? Like, or is it something else entirely? Like, what is the best deck in the format once this strike goes?
So I want to go back to the speed of the format, and I think we And the other discourse I've been sort of hearing has been under the impression that the format's going to slow down. Which, in a sense, implies that Viserai was the reason that the format is as fast as it is right now. But I'm not sure that he is, and that's the thing. I actually think Syndra is the one responsible for how fast the format is right now. So with Viserai leaving, I'm not entirely sure whether the speed of the format changes. And then maybe the Enigma still just isn't allowed to play because Syndra is going around. And that matchup is so hard for Enigma, right? So, yeah, I guess so my question to you is, I guess, does the format slow down? Does this assumption that the format is going to slow down after Viserai leaves, is that a valid assumption? Like, is he the cause of the speed of the format? Or is it actually just the fact that we have Syndra who's pseudo-intellect 5? And so you either raise her or you... Yeah.
I think it's not directly responsible, but it gatekeeps a lot of decks that would regulate the speed of the format. So we spoke about, Guardians just then, like what's the impact? When Viserai and Enigma are kind of terrible for you as Guardians, like that seems like not a very good place to be. And then you also have Aurora. It's like I have to deal with Aurora. I have to come up with a plan against that. But then also I have like Viserai to deal with, and I have to think about the fact that people are still showing up playing Enigma. It's like, yeah, so I don't think it's a direct impact. I think it is by proxy of the fact that Viserai is gatekeeping some of these decks from being playable in the format. Even you spoke about the Warriors, right? It's just like, well, Valiant Dynamo is a pretty good card, right? Like, is this just we didn't talk about Kasai actually, but Kasai is interesting if that format kind of becomes just, if it doesn't slow down and it's just very aggressive, and you don't have to worry about Viserai anymore. Like Kasai becomes interesting. So yeah, I think more than likely it does slow down because I think some of these decks become more playable. But if the format almost kind of sees out Enigma, like it's, well, that's the other thing as well. I just think it has to slow down because even if if we think Enigma's really good, it becomes good again because it'll prey on some of these Guardians, some of these Earth Heroes, some of these things. If the format continues to stay fast, well, Enigma's not going to be good. But people are going to react by playing the Guardians. Like, that is just going to happen. Like, there's just more room to play Guardian because the best deck in the format that was aggressive and also combo-esque was not a good matchup for you. But that is gone now. And then if you say, okay, Syndra Aurora, like, yeah, Arachne, whatever, good matchups, brilliant.
I think that makes sense. Yeah. I think you've convinced me. Yeah, so the meta will slow down because people will bring those decks. There are two classes we haven't touched on at all. And these are both classes of your expertise. So I was going to quickly ask you if anything you want to say on these classes. I'm going to guess the answer is no, and just keep them on the shelf. But I think it's important to just bring them up. Brutes and Mechanologists. Anything you want to say on any of the heroes in these classes?
It's tough out there for a Brute right now. I don't think it gets much better. If the format is fast, like that is tough for Brutes. So Brutes thrive best in mid-range formats, in formats where they can utilize their sheer numbers, leverage a card like Bloodrush Bellows, leverage Intimidate if your name's Rhinar. That's very difficult, I think, in this day and age. The deck's just a little bit soft in terms of power level. But KO, for instance, I think is the one where it's like, okay, what is a world where KO comes back into the fold? And I think it has to look something like a very mid-rangey format where you've got Enigma running around, you've got the Guardians running around, and you don't have too many. Basically, if you have too many decks that are just faster than you, then you're so poor into those matchups, like the ninjas of the world. But if the format slows down and people react by playing more robust sort of aggro decks, or aggro decks that can do many combos or present damage in more meaningful ways, as opposed to going wide, which I think is kind of what KO does to an extent, then also KO becomes a contender because of the decks that will be the level 2 of the meta. So yeah, I think that's how KO comes back in. Yeah, thoughts on that before I go to mech, I guess?
So I don't want to talk about KO too much. I think KO is just fine, but I might have been having too many conversations with Mansant, but I think Levia is a lot more real than people think she is. I think she is good into like the Jarls and the Florians and the Enigmas. And I think she's actually also good into the Assassins. I think what I found playing into Levia as Assassin is that it is so incredibly difficult to find a pivot between Fleshbag and Husk. It is just really, really hard to find a pivot. Oftentimes when I'm against Levia as an assassin, I feel like my way out is them bricking. It's nothing to do with what I can do.
Yeah, they'll make the window for you. Like I just think that hero is, I just think the hero is just fundamentally not good. Like I just think that the fact of how you have to build and play that hero means that every game should, like, people are probably not playing correctly if they don't just trade damage into them until they do the thing and then they block and hope that they brick, because like the more turns that go, like they are going to brick. Like that is the thing. It is just going to happen. There's just so many easy ways for that deck to brick. Yes, it's gotten better with the new 6 power, like they can get go again and stuff like that, but that deck still has so many fundamental problems with the hero ability, and I think almost every deck can play towards it, or they're just faster than it with more damage, and that deck doesn't have good ways to play disruption. So I don't know. You'll have to do a lot more to convince me, unfortunately, on Leviathan.
It's also gotten better with Call to the Grave, and Viserai was one of its hardest matchups. So
yeah, that's fair. Call to the Grave is like
yeah. Cool. So mech. Do anything we want to say about mech?
I think what's interesting about mech is there a world where Dash gets its last little living legend points in a format that slows down, and there's a world where you can play Pistol Chamber package. Like, no High Octane is such a big hit to that, though, because you can't set up these good combo turns anymore. Like, good... one of the kind of ways you would navigate the format a little bit is you would lean on Purifier, High Octane, kind of big damage turns, especially like, potentially against like Guardians and stuff like that. And I just don't think you just don't have that element anymore. So I honestly think that the best way to play Dash is to just be a really good aggro deck with Hanabi Blaster, and that is just worse than what it was with Pistol and High Octane. So, or you need a format that's very specifically a lot of control decks, and you can do the item plan. But the funny thing is, right, you play the item plan into Victor, it's not even a good matchup, which is just like, what is even Dash's role then? So actually, honestly, I think this format with Viserai gone, it just gets worse for mech, and it doesn't get better. And I think IO is in the same boat. Like, that was a good matchup.
The aggro version of it is just, seems like it's just going to be worse numbers than anything Syndra or Aurora is doing. So at that point, it's like, why are you playing mech? The only thing I can think of is if the entire meta is very, very soft to T-Bone. Then I could see mech being the better aggro deck compared to Aurora or Syndra, which, to some extent, we have seen like inklings of it in a sense. I mean, you brought Dash when Zen was terrorizing the format because of how soft he was to T-Bone, right? You T-Bone away the hat, and then now it's like they don't get a power turn anymore, and then you are doing better numbers than them. We're sort of seeing that a little bit. I mean, you could argue Syndra is in a similar spot, but I don't think enough of the format is like that where you can justify mech being an aggro deck of choice when the other aggro decks are just more damage.
The reason that Dash aggro, so you said Dash aggro, just there's other decks with better numbers. I'm actually not sure that's true. Like, Dash's numbers are pretty ridiculous. Like, you start with the Tickler Pounder, which is 6 extra damage. You have max velocity. Like, when you are playing Hanabi, yeah, you don't have like the weapon or the pistol High Octane package anymore, but you do have 2 to 3 activations of free 5 damage, right? On top of just being like trying to play almost like Pitchless or a Frost single blue on your big turns, for instance. But your deck is the resource. So if the aggro deck can ever pivot to fatigue you, aka Warrior, then you just get destroyed. So if Warrior also comes up, that's really bad for Dash, I think, in this way. But honestly, I actually think Dash is playable right now because the format is really aggressive, and so these aggro decks can't block out, and you can deal a lot of damage, and T-Bone, to your point, is relevant, and you can play some cards that are good into Viserai. But yeah, and the Guardians are low at the moment. The Guardians, the Warriors are low at the moment. The problem you have to watch out for is the Assassins. It's particularly new. But I actually think it just can't get better for mech. Like, I think it only gets worse. And what has hurt mech so much is honestly just the fact that they took the best card and banned it. So
true. And I think, to your point about the Assassins, mech is, the aggro versions of mech are also more vulnerable to disruption and fatigue in that sense compared to like the Auroras and the Syndras.
Well, yeah, they are. They can block because they have a bit of a fridge, and you have like your whole deck blocks for 3. But the problem is that you will run out of cards. Like, that is actually the problem. It's like disruption doesn't disrupt your ability to deal damage. It disrupts the clock. Like, it literally changes the clock on the game, and you will run out of road, unfortunately. So yeah.
Yep.
Any last thoughts?
I suppose we didn't really talk about Azalea.
No, we didn't.
Because yeah, when we think about powerful players, I'm surprised. Actually, I actually completely slipped my mind until I was looking at Riptide on our show notes, and I was like, wait, there is another Ranger, and I think Azalea probably takes a hit, right? If we expect the meta to slow down, if we expect a defensive, especially the Earth heroes, coming in, I could see Azalea taking a bit of a hit. I mean, Jarl and Florian just sound like miserable matchups for Azalea.
Yeah, it takes a hit, I think. I think it's got to. I think Azalea had a reasonable matchup in the Viserai. Like, it's probably somewhere around like 50-50. So it wasn't necessarily like it's losing a favorable matchup, but it's the on-flow impacts of what's going to happen to the format, I think, that's going to hurt Azalea the most. Azalea's a weird one. It feels like it honestly is either really good or not very good, and it doesn't change a lot during a meta. It seems to be when the meta shifts that happens. So, yeah.
Makes sense.
Cool. All right. Well, that is episode 201 of Arsenal Pass. Looking at a post-Viserai world, I think if we see it happen this weekend, it'll be interesting to see week 4 of Road to Nationals. Like, I actually think that would be the best thing for the game. I think that will set up a really interesting dynamic as we head towards Pro Tour London. If it lasts the whole way through, that maybe means that people have a bit more. They get to keep things under wraps a little bit more for Pro Tour London. We might see some more surprises, but I think a more fleshed out meta is always more interesting for a Pro Tour because that is when people can build and react to a meta. So I really do hope, honestly. Also, I'd love to play the last week of Road to Nationals with like not Viserai in the format, and just like selfishly, it's really interesting to me. Like, I'm really down for working out what to play to our conversation, right? So yeah, we'll see what happens this coming week.
Yeah, I'm super looking forward to. Looking forward to like brewing again in a fresh meta, which it definitely feels like it once Viserai leaves. I'm with you on that. I think it'll be really, really cool to get to play a last week of RTNs in a fresh format.
Agree. Well, we will walk out of the doors of the monastery, say goodbye to the Purple Man himself, and we'll also say goodbye to you until next week's episode. Shout out to Arsenal Pass patrons. Go and check out our additional content there if you want. Lots more things coming up. We've got Pankaj's gameplay analysis video coming up very soon with this very special guest. There is the deck tech up on the channel as well, so lots of things. I will throw this Viserai list up and my sideboard plan there as well, so yeah, you can check all that out. Until next week, we will see you in the next episode.